All right, welcome to Safe Space JA. My name is Jessica Thompson. I'm a counseling psychologist, and I'm here today with Jerniel. We're going to be talking about his experience supporting a loved one with mental illness. Tell me about your experience in supporting someone who has experienced a mental illness.
Okay, thank you, Jessica. I'm happy to be here today. Um, well, I've had several experiences. I've had several friends and also been in relationships with persons who suffer from mental illnesses. So I have encountered depression, anxiety, personality disorders. So it has been a lot, I must admit. But there's a lot that I've learned from my experiences. I've also made a lot of mistakes dealing with persons who have a mental disorder, a mental illness. Because of that, I have developed some sort of passion to be a micro mental advocate specifically, dealing with love, paramount love for sure. I want persons to know that they have the capacity to show love to persons who have a mental illness, but I also want persons who are suffering from mental illness to realize that they have the capacity to receive it, and also they are deserving of that love. From my experiences, I've learned, I think, 5 major things. The first thing I learned is that you can't support someone and be selfish at the same time. One of my partners, when I was dating, I dated someone who had a mental illness. I remember getting up one morning and literally taking up my phone and Googling, how can I date someone who has depression? And there were 2 things that were very specific that they said. They're not just sad, 1, and 2, you cannot take, it's not all about you. And for like 2 weeks, I was able to balance the idea that it's not all about me, but then my own self-interest prevailed. And because of that, the relationship ended because I cared more about myself and having what I wanted from the relationship and ensuring that what I want prevailed at all times. There were times when I just couldn't understand why my partner would want to hang out with me, why they were so distant, and I think, but we're there. So why don't you just want to do the things that normal people in a relationship do? And because of that selfishness, the relationship just couldn't work. So there's one thing that I've learned about supporting persons who have a mental illness, whether romantically or in a platonic space. You cannot be selfish. You cannot always think that your self-interest is going to prevail, or you're always going to have your self-interest be the most important thing.
Well, I think that's really important, but also to kind of flip that coin, I think it's also really important to remember that you're also a person in this relationship. And so if it is that your needs are being unfulfilled, then maybe you can support them in other ways. Because one of the things that I wanted to point out is that it can be really difficult and exhausting to always be there for someone in that sense who is going through something as serious as something like depression. And so it's important to kind of learn how to take care of yourself in that. And maybe one of those ways for you, for example, could be thinking about it differently. Like thinking about it like, okay, this is not a personal issue. It's not that they don't want to hang out with me, things like that. But this is about your story. I know that, but I just wanted to make sure that, you know that it's not that you did anything wrong.
No, I don't think I did anything wrong, but also I think, okay, my background, I have 2 degrees in psychology. So I do have a background in psychology.
You have an understanding of
I have an understanding of what's happening at the time. One thing I can tell you, learning all those theories don't really match up to the real life situation of it all. But having that understanding, I thought I could handle it. I thought that I was in a space to handle it, and I thought that I was.
It's different because
I thought that I could, and I also thought that because I was aware that a person was suffering from a mental illness, and I went into the situation knowing that I would be in a supportive role. But yet I became very selfish in the situation. One, not always be understanding of what they're going through, and always feel like what I'm going through is the only thing that is important.
I understand what you mean. I can see how that would be
real
tension.
There's a tug of war. More so.
I bet. So that was the first thing you've learned of 5. What was the second thing?
The second thing is do not mistake symptoms for personality traits.
Oh, that's a very profound thing to say.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, so a lot of times I've had friends, and we know that our friend is suffering from mental illness, but we're kind of like, oh, I just saw she stay. She know what I'm going to do. I just saw she turn. That's how she just behaves.
Yeah.
And literally, it's actually a symptom of her illness that is manifesting.
Sure.
And we're saying that, oh, that's just how she is.
Right, like social anxiety,
yeah.
for example. It could be that, oh, she just dashed away.
Yeah, so I've learned not to think that someone is pathologically sad and say, okay, they're just a sad person. I've learned not to say that someone is just nervous, or because someone who might be suffering from a personality disorder, they're just erratic. And I've learned not to box them into that and say, okay, that's who they are. But also realize that that is actually a symptom of their mental illness and not their actual personality. Because I realize that it's very easy to dismiss it because you think that they're just that way, and then you disconnect and you stop supporting. So I've learned not to dismiss their symptoms as personality traits, so I don't disconnect and I don't take away my support. Yeah.
Wow, big one. All right.
Yeah.
What's number 3?
The next thing is, one thing, no matter how much you are there, they still are experiencing their mental illnesses as an isolated being. And no matter how you try, they will always experience that a sense of loneliness. Your support alone cannot solve the issue. And I remember sometimes in supporting friends, I wonder like, why don't they want to talk to me about it? Or why don't they know that I'm always here? But I realize that when they go home, they're by themselves. They're the one who's experiencing depression, experiencing anxiety. And no matter what you can do, no matter what you say, you won't be able to solve it. Your presence is not enough. And I've learned not to rely too much on my presence or think that my presence is going to change things, because there is a sort of loneliness and isolation that comes with dealing with a mental illness. Yes.
Yeah. No, that's another really, really good point.
Yeah.
And also, if you think that it's all up to you, then that's so much responsibility on yourself. And that can really kind of drain you.
Yes, it definitely can drain you.
And I'm sure affect the relationship too, because you might be thinking like, oh, well, am I not enough for them? Like, is it that they don't want my support anymore? And then you maybe start to kind of pull away, and then I can see how that would just lead to trouble.
Definitely.
All right. Number 4.
Number 4 is the idea that a mental illness sometimes can be the pink elephant in the room, and you try to balance acting like it's not there and acting like it really is there. And so you really have to find that balance, because no one wants to talk about their mental illness every time, but they also don't want you to forget that it's there. So no one wants
tricky balance.
Yeah, so they want to feel special but not too special. And it's a tricky balance to have, I must admit. And sometimes I have made the mistake of doing it incorrectly. I have not spoken to my friend about their mental illness enough, or I've spoken to my partner about the mental illness too much. And then it becomes like,
this is all we talk about.
That's all we talk about. And that balance is difficult to manage, for sure.
Yeah.
So I've definitely learned that. I've not mastered it. I think it's different from person to person. But I think what I've found is most important is that you provide the environment for them to know that if they want to talk about it, they can. And also know when to intervene and say, okay, we need to talk about it now, because clearly everything is not okay.
Yeah, so I guess that would change from person to person, situation to situation. And I'm sure it's also took a lot of self-awareness on your part to know maybe when you were pushing too much or when you kind of weren't being available enough. So it is a tricky balance, and I'm sure that your psychology background was helpful too.
Yes, possibly, yes. And the last thing I think I've learned is the pressure to get help. You have to know how much pressure to give and how much not to give. Not everyone is always ready to go see the psychiatrist or psychologist. Not everyone wants to know that they will be stigmatized, per se. they don't want it to be their personification. They don't want to be defined by their mental illness. And you have to be very careful about how you try to support them. And sometimes support can be pressuring. Oh, I think you really need to go and see the doctor. I think you really need to go to therapy. Oh, I think you need to go to on medication. And that in itself can push them away. And if
they're not ready.
Yeah, if they're not ready. Or if you give no pressure at all and make it seem as if everything is fine, then you could also not be supporting them the way they need to be supported. Because sometimes persons need to be told that we need to go to the hospital. We need to go now. I remember I had a friend who, another friend said to me that we're going to go for him and we're going to bring him to the hospital. And we never told the friend that we were going to carry him to the hospital. We literally drove up to the hospital. We picked him up, drove to the hospital, and my friend turned to him and said, so we're going to carry you into the emergency room and we're going to carry you to see a psychiatrist. And he said, okay. But before all of that, he was very reluctant to even go and search for treatment. He knew that something was wrong. He was very aware, but he was very reluctant to search for treatment. So he thought he wasn't ready, but we provided the situation for him to be ready. So balancing that pressure on them sometimes is extremely hard.
Another way.
Yeah, it really could have gone
another way. So I mean, but I'm sure that your decision was based on knowing your friend and knowing where he was at. So you were kind of able to make that decision and distinguish between
definitely
whether this would go really poorly or pretty well.
Yes.
Yeah, but wow, you took a risk there. But that's amazing. And so it sounds like you are just in general a really supportive, intuitive, sensitive friend and partner, which, as I said before, can be really hard when someone is going through these things. And so, meaning when the other person in the relationship is going through these things. So I wondered, what are some ways that you take care of yourself to make sure that you're not too wrapped up in the situation, if you know what I mean?
Okay, I take time for myself for sure. And definitely a lot of introspecting has to happen because it can be a stressful situation. And so I have to do a lot of stress management for myself. I create a healthy distance, and I use the word healthy distance between me and that person because I don't want to be drawn in too much. So a distance where I am still here, but my sanity is not at risk.
Right. Because as you were kind of alluding to before, or when you were talking about how some people are just not ready to seek help, you can't make them be ready. And so the more that you're invested in such a specific outcome, if it doesn't happen, then that only hurts you. So I appreciate that you set a healthy distance where you're able to kind of come back to yourself and say, all right, well, I know that I still have to manage my own life, but you're still available to this person who is in need of support.
Yeah, definitely. Yes.
It's really awesome. I mean, it took a while for you to figure out these balances.
And from making a lot of mistakes for sure. And there are a lot of things that I've also learned. Like, for example, now, I know what to do when someone has a panic attack, for sure.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time reading about this online because several persons have had panic attacks in my presence and I handle it incorrectly. So now I know how to do it. And I think also, as also a big part of it is also getting to know your friend beyond your mental illness, like an actual person.
Yeah.
So I realized that especially with panic attacks, all you need to do is find something that you stay calm, but also find something that would calm them. And I would also take knowing the person.
Yeah, because again, I mean, they're a person, they're not a collection of symptoms. So
Definitely.
To get to know them for them. Yeah. All right. So what do you hope that people take home from this story today?
That you can definitely provide the support. I think that's something that is extremely important. I also want persons to know that it's okay to date persons who are suffering from a mental illness. I think a lot of persons shy away from it because they don't think they can handle it. I won't say that it's that easy one too, but it can be done. You definitely can do it. I also want persons who are living from mental illness to realize that there are persons out there who actually do love them. And I'm not only talking about familial love, because I think a lot of times that persons who suffer from mental illness, it becomes the responsibility of their parents or their family to show them that love and support, and that's the only love and support they get used to, and they don't expect that someone else will show that support to them. So I also want to say that there are persons out there who are willing to love and support you and have the capacity to. I've seen persons who suffer from depression decide not to be in relationships because they don't think they're good enough, or it's not going to work out, or the partner won't be able to manage it. I also want to say that those persons are deserving of the love and that they have the capacity to receive it.
Yeah.
And I also want to encourage persons to personify being a safe space, because that's the only way that we can truly address the mental health issues in Jamaica, if more persons are safe spaces themselves.
Wow. That again was really profound, and definitely something that's worth pondering on, that in order to truly create a safe space, then it can't just be a physical space, or it can't just be dependent on one person. It has to be dependent on all of us.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing with us today. It was so nice to
Thank
have
you.
you.
It was nice to be here.
Great. Thank you for contributing to our safe space.